Welcome back to the historian's Tome. Before we begin our journey through the ancient lands of Wales tonight, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It helps us continue bringing you these restful historical journeys. We're curious, where are you watching from right now? Is it late evening, the middle of the night, or perhaps early morning where you are? Whatever time it is, get comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and let the story of the Welsh people carry you into peaceful sleep. Tonight, we travel back thousands of years to explore the mountains, valleys and coasts of Wales and the remarkable people who called it home. Long before the name Wales existed, the land was home to ancient peoples who left their marks on the hills and valleys. These early inhabitants built stone circles, burial chambers, and hill forts that still dot the Welsh landscape today. Around 600 BC, Celtic tribes began arriving in Britain, bringing with them a new culture, language, and way of life that would shape Wales forever. The Celts were not a single unified people, but rather a collection of tribes, each with their own territory and customs. In what would become Wales, several major tribes established themselves. The Silures occupied the southeast, the Ordovices controlled the northwest and central regions, the Demetae settled in the southwest, and the Detiangli made their home in the northeast. These tribes were fierce warriors, skilled metalworkers, and talented artists who created intricate designs in gold, bronze, and iron. Celtic society was organized around kinship and tribal loyalty. Druids held immense power as priests, judges, and keepers of knowledge. They conducted religious ceremonies in sacred groves and passed down stories, laws, and history through oral tradition. The Celts worshipped many gods associated with nature, warfare, and fertility. They believed in the spiritual power of rivers, mountains, and forests, seeing the divine in the natural world around them. Life in Celtic Wales revolved around farming, hunting, and raising livestock. People lived in round houses with thatched roofs, built within fortified settlements on hilltops. These hill forts provided protection from rival tribes and wild animals. Families worked together to grow crops like wheat and barley, tend sheep and cattle, and craft tools and weapons. Trade routes connected Welsh tribes to other Celtic peoples across Britain and continental Europe. In 43 AD, everything changed when Roman legions invaded Britain under Emperor Claudius. The Romans quickly conquered much of southern and eastern Britain, but Wales proved far more difficult. The Welsh tribes fought fiercely to defend their homeland. The Roman historian Tacitus wrote detailed accounts of these battles, describing the bravery and determination of the Welsh warriors. The Silures in particular became legendary for their resistance. They conducted guerrilla warfare against Roman forces, using their knowledge of the mountainous terrain to launch surprise attacks and then disappear into the forests and hills. The Romans found it nearly impossible to defeat them in open battle. For years, the Silures inflicted heavy casualties on Roman legions, frustrating the empire's attempts at conquest. The Ordovices in the north were equally defiant. Led by the warrior queen Cartimandua and later by Caractacus, a prince who had fled from southeastern Britain, they organized resistance across multiple tribes. Caractacus became a symbol of Celtic defiance, fighting the Romans for nearly a decade before his eventual capture in 51 AD. Even in defeat, his dignity impressed the Romans and the Emperor Claudius spared his life. Despite fierce resistance, the Romans gradually established control over Wales through a combination of military force and strategic fort building. They constructed a network of roads connecting their fortresses with major bases at Caerleon, Chester, and Carmarthen. Roman soldiers stationed in Wales came from across the empire, bringing diverse cultures and religions to the region. Roman rule brought significant changes to Wales. Towns developed around military forts with shops, bathhouses, and temples. The Romans introduced new building techniques using stone and concrete, new crops and farming methods, and a monetary economy. Some Welsh tribes cooperated with Rome, adopting Roman customs and enjoying the benefits of trade and relative peace. However, Roman influence in Wales was never as deep as in other parts of Britain. The mountainous terrain made complete control difficult, and many Welsh people continued their traditional ways of life in remote valleys. The Welsh language, descended from the ancient Celtic tongues, survived and evolved despite Roman presence. This linguistic continuity would become one of the defining features of Welsh identity. Christianity began spreading through Wales during the late Roman period. The new religion arrived through various routes, from Roman soldiers and traders, from missionaries travelling along trade routes, and possibly from contacts with Christian communities in Ireland and Gaul. Unlike the dramatic conversion stories found elsewhere, Christianity seems to have gradually blended with existing Celtic beliefs in Wales. By the early 5th century, the Roman Empire was crumbling under pressure from barbarian invasions. Roman legions withdrew from Britain around 410 AD to defend Rome itself, leaving the Romano-British population to fend for themselves. This departure marked the end of nearly 4 centuries of Roman presence, but it was also the beginning of a new chapter in Welsh history. After the Romans left, Wales entered a period often called the Age of Saints. This was a time when Celtic Christianity flourished, and wandering holy men and women established churches, monasteries, and schools across the Welsh landscape. These early saints became legendary figures whose stories blend history and miracle, creating a rich tapestry of Welsh spiritual heritage. St. David, or Dewi Sant in Welsh, stands as the most famous of these holy figures. Born around 500 AD, David founded a monastery at Glyndwr, now known as St. David's in Pembrokeshire. He taught a strict form of monastic life, where monks devoted themselves to prayer, study, and manual labour. They drank only water, ate simple vegetarian food, and pulled ploughs themselves rather than using animals. David's final words to his followers, "Be joyful, keep the faith, and do the little things," became a cornerstone of Welsh spirituality. The Age of Saints produced many remarkable figures beyond David. Saint Illtyd founded one of the most important early schools at Llaniltud Fawr, where students learned Latin, theology, mathematics, and classical literature. St. Taylor worked in southern Wales, establishing churches and caring for the sick during a devastating plague. St. Daniel founded the cathedral at Bangor, which became a centre of learning and religious life in North Wales. These saints travelled constantly, establishing small churches wherever they went. Unlike the grand cathedrals of later centuries, these early churches were simple wooden or stone buildings, often located near sacred springs or wells. The saints chose isolated locations for their monasteries, seeking places where they could focus on prayer and contemplation. Many monasteries were built on islands, remote valleys, or windswept coastal headlands. Celtic Christianity in Wales developed differently from Roman Christianity. Welsh monks maintained their own methods of calculating Easter, their own styles of tonsure or haircut, and their own organizational structures. They emphasized personal devotion, connection with nature, and learning. Welsh monasteries became centers of scholarship where monks copied manuscripts, studied scripture, and preserved both Christian and classical knowledge. During this same period, Wales was taking shape as a land of separate kingdoms. Without Roman authority to unify Britain, the Romano-British population organized into regional kingdoms based on old tribal territories. In Wales, several major kingdoms emerged. Gwynedd in the northwest became the most powerful, ruling over Anglesey and Snowdonia. Powys controlled the central and eastern regions. Dyfed occupied the southwest. Gwent and Llywelyn, later united as Morgan WG, dominated the southeast. These early Welsh kingdoms were not stable, fixed entities. Borders constantly shifted as kingdoms fought each other for territory and dominance. Royal succession was not automatically passed from father to eldest son. Instead, any male member of the royal family could potentially claim the throne, leading to frequent disputes and civil wars. This system produced strong leaders through competition, but also created instability. The kings of this era were warrior leaders who had to prove themselves in battle. They gathered loyal followers in their halls, rewarding them with gold, weapons, and land. Court poets sang of battles, heroic deeds, and the glory of their patrons. The greatest warriors achieved lasting fame through these poems, which were memorized and passed down through generations. This oral tradition preserved the history and legends of early Wales. Meanwhile, a new threat was developing to the east. Anglo-Saxon invaders, originally invited as mercenaries by Romano-British leaders, began conquering and settling in eastern Britain. These Germanic peoples gradually pushed westward, conquering British kingdoms and establishing their own. The British people were killed, enslaved, or pushed into the western regions of the island. Wales became a refuge for these displaced Britons. The struggle between the Welsh and the Anglo-Saxons defined much of early medieval Welsh history. The Welsh remembered themselves as the true Britons, the rightful inhabitants of the whole island. They called themselves Cymri, meaning fellow countrymen, and their land Cymru. The Anglo-Saxons called them Welsh, derived from a Germanic word meaning foreigner or stranger, an ironic reversal, since the Welsh had been there first. One of the most famous Welsh heroes from this period is King Arthur, though his historical existence remains debated. The earliest references to Arthur appear in Welsh sources describing him as a warrior who fought against the Saxon invaders. Later, medieval writers transformed Arthur into a chivalrous king with a round table, but the original Welsh Arthur was a battle leader who defended Britain against overwhelming odds. Whether real or legendary, Arthur represented Welsh resistance and hope for reclaiming lost lands. The kingdom of Gwynedd emerged as the strongest Welsh kingdom during the 6th and 7th centuries. Its rulers claimed descent from Cunedda, a warrior who supposedly came from northern Britain to drive Irish raiders from North Wales. Gwynedd's strength came from its geography. The mountains of Snowdonia provided natural defences, while the fertile island of Anglesey, called the Granary of Wales, supplied abundant food. Gwynedd's kings used this secure base to dominate other Welsh kingdoms. Cadwallon ap Cadfan of Gwynedd achieved remarkable success against the Anglo-Saxons in the early 7th century. Allied with Penda of Mercia, an English kingdom that remained pagan, Cadwallon invaded the powerful kingdom of Northumbria. In 633 AD, he defeated and killed King Edwin of Northumbria at the Battle of Hatfield Chase. For a brief moment, it seemed the Welsh might reverse the Saxon conquest. However, Cadwallon was killed the following year, and the opportunity was lost. The Battle of Chester, around 616 AD, marked a turning point. The Northumbrians defeated a Welsh army and massacred monks from Bangor who had come to pray for Welsh victory. This battle severed the land connection between Wales and the other British kingdoms in the north, isolating Wales. From this point forward, Wales would develop its own distinct identity, separate from other British peoples. By the 8th century, the border between Wales and the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms had largely stabilised. King Offa of Mercia constructed a massive earthwork called Offa's Dyke, running roughly along the modern Welsh-English border. This ditch and embankment, stretching over 150 miles, marked the boundary between Welsh and English territories. Though not a fortified wall, Offa's Dyke served as a clear territorial marker and likely regulated trade and movement between the two peoples. The 9th century brought a new terror to Welsh shores with the arrival of Viking raiders. These Norse warriors from Scandinavia sailed their long ships along the coasts, attacking monasteries, churches, and settlements. The Vikings sought silver, gold, and slaves, and the wealthy monasteries made perfect targets. The monks had treasuries filled with precious objects donated by the faithful, and they were usually unable to defend themselves. The first recorded Viking raid on Wales occurred in 850 AD when raiders attacked the monastery at St. David's. The Vikings returned repeatedly over the following decades, devastating this holy site multiple times. In 987, they killed the Bishop of St. David's along with his clergy. The raids were terrifying and unpredictable. Coastal communities lived in constant fear, never knowing when dragon-headed ships might appear on the horizon. The Vikings didn't just raid Wales, they also established settlements, particularly in the south and on the island of Anglesey. Dublin became a major Viking city, and from there, Norse warriors controlled much of the Irish Sea. They used islands like Anglesey as bases for further raids and as winter camps. Some Vikings married into Welsh families and settled permanently, bringing Scandinavian names, customs, and words into Welsh culture. Despite the destruction they caused, the Vikings also brought opportunities. Welsh kingdoms sometimes allied with Viking groups against rival Welsh kingdoms or against the English. Trade routes expanded, connecting Wales more closely to Scandinavia, Ireland, and the wider Viking world. Welsh merchants traded wool, slaves, and cattle for silver, weapons, and luxury goods from across the Viking trading network. The Viking threat helped push Welsh kingdoms toward greater unity. In the face of external enemies, internal conflicts seemed less important. The idea of a unified Wales ruled by a single king began to emerge. Several strong rulers attempted to achieve this goal with varying degrees of success. The most successful was Rhodri Mawr, meaning Rhodri the Great. Rhodri became king of Gwynedd in 844 AD. Through marriage, inheritance, and conquest, he expanded his rule over Powys and Saesilog, bringing most of Wales under his authority. Rhodri proved himself a capable warrior, defeating a Viking leader in battle in 856 AD. This victory earned him fame throughout Wales and beyond. When Rhodri was killed fighting the English in 878 AD, he had established the principle that Wales could and should be ruled as a single kingdom. Rhodri's descendants, known as the House of Aberfraw, would dominate Welsh politics for centuries. His grandson, Llywelyn, or Hywel the Good, became the most famous medieval Welsh ruler. Hywel ruled Gwynedd, Powys, and Deheubarth, controlling nearly all of Wales by the time of his death in 950 AD. But Hywel is remembered not just for his political achievements but for his legal reforms. Llywelyn codified Welsh law, creating a unified legal system for his kingdom. The laws of Llywelyn covered everything from property rights to marriage, from theft to murder. These laws reveal much about medieval Welsh society. They showed greater respect for women than contemporary English or Norman law. Women could own property, divorce their husbands under certain circumstances, and receive compensation for insults to their honor. Illegitimate children had inheritance rights, and the laws emphasized compensation and reconciliation over harsh punishment. The laws of Llywelyn divided society into distinct classes. The king stood at the top, followed by nobles, freemen, and slaves. Each person's honor price varied according to their status, determining the compensation owed if they were killed or injured. The laws protected the king's authority while also limiting his power through established customs and procedures. Though Hywel's unified kingdom didn't survive his death, his legal code continued to govern Wales for centuries. After Hywel's death, Wales again fragmented into competing kingdoms. Gwynedd, Powys, and Deheubarth emerged as the three major powers, each claiming superiority over the others. The 10th and 11th centuries saw constant warfare between these kingdoms and against the English. The rise of powerful English kingdoms, particularly Wessex under Alfred the Great and his successors, put increasing pressure on Wales. The English were gradually unifying under a single monarchy and becoming more organized and powerful. They built fortified towns called burhs along the Welsh border, established permanent military forces, and developed sophisticated administrative systems. Welsh kingdoms, by contrast, remained politically fragmented and often fought each other as much as they fought the English. This disunity would prove costly in the centuries to come. Gruffudd ap Llywelyn emerged as a strong leader in the 11th century, briefly unifying Wales once more. Between 1039 and 1063, Gruffudd conquered or dominated all the major Welsh kingdoms, becoming the only Welsh king to rule all of Wales. He was a fierce warrior who defeated English armies multiple times and even formed alliances with rebellious English earls against the English crown. Gruffudd's reign represented the high point of Welsh independence before the Norman conquest. He was recognised as King of Wales by the English, a rare acknowledgement of Welsh sovereignty. Gruffudd strengthened Welsh defences, reformed administration, and promoted Welsh culture. However, his aggressive policies made him many enemies, both in Wales and England. In 1063, Harold Godwinson, the Earl of Wessex, who would later become King Harold II of England, launched a devastating invasion of Wales. Harold's forces swept through Gwynedd and Powys with overwhelming force. Facing defeat, some of Gruffudd's own men betrayed and killed him, sending his head to Harold as a peace offering. With Gruffudd's death, Wales lost its last chance for unity before the Norman invasion. Just 3 years after Gruffudd's death, William the Conqueror invaded England, defeating King Harold at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. This Norman conquest of England would have profound implications for Wales. The Normans were aggressive, well-organised and hungry for land. They would not be content with controlling England alone. Their eyes soon turned westward toward Wales. The Norman conquest of England brought a new and more dangerous enemy to the Welsh borders. The Normans were different from the Anglo-Saxons who had preceded them. They were professional warriors with advanced military technology, including armoured cavalry, sophisticated fortifications, and crossbows. They built castles wherever they conquered, establishing permanent bases that were extremely difficult to capture. William the Conqueror didn't immediately invade Wales. Instead, he appointed powerful Norman lords called Marcher lords to guard the Welsh border and gave them permission to conquer whatever Welsh lands they could. These Marcher lords established semi-independent territories along the border, owing allegiance to the English king but ruling their domains with almost complete freedom. This system proved devastatingly effective. The Normans advanced into Wales gradually, building castles to secure each conquered area before pushing further. They constructed hundreds of castles across Wales, from simple wooden structures on earthen mounds to massive stone fortresses. These castles served as military bases, administrative centres, and symbols of Norman power. Many of these castles still stand today, dominating the Welsh landscape. The Norman invasion was most successful in the south and along the borders. Pembrokeshire in the southwest was heavily settled by Norman and Flemish colonists, becoming so anglicised that it was called Little England beyond Wales. The lowlands of Glamorgan and Gwent fell under Norman control. Eastern Wales, facing England, was conquered and organised into Marcher lordships. However, the mountainous north and west proved much harder to conquer. The Welsh resisted the Norman invasion fiercely. They used guerrilla tactics, attacking Norman forces and then retreating into the mountains where heavy cavalry couldn't follow. They destroyed crops and supplies, making it difficult for Norman armies to sustain long campaigns. They captured and destroyed castles whenever possible. The Welsh showed remarkable resilience, repeatedly recovering from defeats that would have broken other peoples. Several Welsh leaders emerged as heroes during this period of resistance. Gruffudd ap Cynan spent his early life in exile in Ireland, raised by his mother's Viking family. He returned to Wales around 1075 and fought for decades to reclaim the kingdom of Gwynedd. Captured and imprisoned multiple times, Gruffudd always escaped and returned to fight again. His persistence eventually paid off, and he ruled Gwynedd successfully from 1099 until his death in 1137, becoming one of the longest reigning Welsh kings. In South Wales, Rhys ap Tewdwr defended the kingdom of Deheubarth against both Norman aggression and Welsh rivals. He maintained his kingdom's independence until 1093, when he was killed fighting Norman forces in Brycheiniog. His death marked the beginning of rapid Norman expansion in South Wales. Without a strong leader to unite resistance, the southern Welsh kingdoms fell to Norman conquest one by one. The Welsh Church played an important role during this period. Norman bishops were appointed to Welsh dioceses, bringing Welsh church organisation under English control. The Normans replaced the old Celtic monastic system with new continental religious orders. Cistercian and Benedictine abbeys were founded across Wales, bringing new agricultural techniques and architectural styles. While this represented cultural loss, these monasteries also became centres of learning that preserved Welsh language and history. Despite Norman pressure, Welsh culture flourished in the 12th century. Welsh poetry reached new heights of sophistication. Court poets, called beard, composed complex verses praising their patrons, recording history, and celebrating Welsh identity. The laws of Hywel were copied and refined. Welsh prose tales, later collected in the Mabinogion, preserved ancient legends and mythology. This cultural renaissance showed that Welsh identity remained strong despite political setbacks. The most successful Welsh resistance came under Owain Gwynedd, son of Gruffudd ap Cynan. Owain ruled Gwynedd from 1137 to 1170 and proved to be a brilliant military and political leader. He expanded Gwynedd's territory, defeating English armies and reclaiming lands conquered by the Normans. In 1157, he successfully resisted an invasion by King Henry II of England, forcing the powerful English monarch to retreat. Owain Gwynedd understood that military strength alone wasn't enough. He formed alliances with other Welsh rulers and with Henry II's enemies in England and France. He reformed Gwynedd's administration, making it more efficient and capable of sustaining long-term resistance. He patronized Welsh culture and the church, strengthening Welsh identity. When Owain died in 1170, Gwynedd had emerged as the clear leader among Welsh kingdoms. In South Wales, Rhys ap Gruffydd, known as the Lord Rhys, achieved similar success in Deheubarth. Rhys initially fought against Henry II, but eventually reached an accommodation with the English king. Henry recognized Rhys as Justiciar of South Wales, effectively making him the king's representative for the region. This gave Rhys authority over other Welsh lords while allowing him to rule Deheubarth independently. The Lord Rhys became a great patron of Welsh culture. In 1176 he held the first recorded Eisteddfod, a gathering of poets and musicians from across Wales. This became a Welsh tradition that continues to the present day. Rhys built castles, founded monasteries, and maintained a magnificent court. Under his rule, Deheubarth experienced peace and prosperity. When he died in 1197, South Wales descended into civil war as his many sons fought over their inheritance. The late 12th century represented a golden age for independent Wales. Strong leaders in Gwynedd and Deheubarth had pushed back Norman expansion and created stable, prosperous kingdoms. Welsh culture flourished. The Welsh maintained their own laws, language and customs despite intense pressure to assimilate. However, this independence wouldn't last much longer. The 13th century began with Wales fragmented and weakened. The death of the Lord Rhys had thrown Deheubarth into chaos. Gwynedd was divided between rival claimants. English power was growing under King John. It seemed Welsh independence might not survive much longer. Then a young man emerged who would change everything. His name was Llywelyn ap Iorwerth, later known as Llywelyn the Great. Llywelyn became ruler of Gwynedd in 1195 at the age of just 22. Over the next decade, he consolidated power in North Wales, defeating rivals and bringing the various parts of Gwynedd under his control. But Llywelyn's ambitions extended beyond Gwynedd. He envisioned a unified Wales under his leadership, strong enough to negotiate with England as an equal power rather than as conquered subjects. Llywelyn combined military skill with political intelligence. He married Joan, the illegitimate daughter of King John of England, in 1205, creating a family connection with the English crown. He formed alliances with Welsh princes throughout Wales, often arranging marriages between his daughters and sons of other Welsh rulers. He also allied with the English barons who opposed King John, supporting them during the civil war that led to Magna Carta in 1215. By 1216, Llywelyn controlled most of Wales either directly or through vassal princes who acknowledged his overlordship. He called himself Prince of Aberfraw and Lord of Snowdon, traditional titles of Gwyned's rulers, but he functioned as Prince of Wales in all but name. Welsh rulers met at Llywelyn's court, recognised his judgments in disputes, and followed his leadership in matters of war and peace. Llywelyn governed his territories effectively, establishing a sophisticated administration based on Welsh law, but incorporating useful elements from Norman and English systems. He built stone castles to defend his lands, founded towns, encouraged trade, and patronised the church. Under his rule, Wales experienced peace and prosperity. Welsh culture flourished. Llywelyn became the most powerful Welsh ruler since Gruffudd ap Llywelyn nearly 2 centuries earlier. King John's death in 1216 removed Llywelyn's greatest enemy. The new English king, Henry III, was only 9 years old. Llywelyn took advantage of this weakness to expand his control over South Wales. However, Llywelyn was wise enough to recognise that complete independence from England was impossible. Instead, he sought to establish Wales as a self-governing principality within the English realm, similar to Scotland's position. In 1218, Llywelyn negotiated the Treaty of Worcester with Henry III's regents. This treaty recognised Llywelyn's conquests and his position as the most powerful lord in Wales. Though technically a vassal of the English king, Llywelyn maintained effective independence. He administered justice, made war and peace, and governed according to Welsh law. The treaty represented the closest Wales would come to formal recognition as a unified, independent nation. Llywelyn ruled Gwynedd until his death in 1240 at about 70 years of age, an impressive lifespan for the time. He had transformed Gwynedd from one Welsh kingdom among many into the heart of a Welsh principality. His grandson, Llywelyn ap Gruffudd, would take these achievements even further. However, the younger Llywelyn would also face a more dangerous enemy than his grandfather ever encountered. After the elder Llywelyn's death, Welsh unity collapsed as his sons and grandsons fought over his inheritance. Llywelyn ap Gruffudd emerged victorious from this civil war by 1255, reuniting Gwynedd and reasserting control over the other Welsh princes. Like his grandfather, the younger Llywelyn combined military skill with political acumen. He took advantage of civil war in England to expand his power dramatically. By 1258, Llywelyn ap Gruffudd controlled most of Wales, and in 1267, King Henry III recognised him as Prince of Wales in the Treaty of Montgomery. This was the first and only time an English king officially recognised a Welsh Prince of Wales. The treaty required other Welsh lords to pay homage to Llywelyn, effectively creating a unified Welsh principality. It seemed Llywelyn had achieved what generations of Welsh leaders had sought, a united, independent Wales. However, Llywelyn's success created resentment among Welsh lords who resented his authority. Many chafed under his rule and looked for opportunities to rebel. The Marcher lords on the borders felt threatened by Welsh unity and strength. Most importantly, a new English king, Edward V, came to the throne in 1272. Edward was ambitious, ruthless, and determined to assert complete control over all of Britain. Relations between Llywelyn and Edward deteriorated quickly. Llywelyn refused to attend Edward's coronation or pay homage to the new king. He married Eleanor de Montfort, daughter of Edward's deceased enemy Simon de Montfort, without royal permission. These insults to Edward's dignity, combined with disputes over land and jurisdiction, made war inevitable. In 1277, Edward invaded Wales with overwhelming force. Edward's army was massive, well supplied, and supported by a fleet that controlled the coasts. He advanced slowly and methodically, building castles and roads as he went, ensuring he could hold conquered territory. He cut off Gwynedd from the fertile island of Anglesey, threatening starvation. Faced with total defeat, Llywelyn was forced to surrender. The Treaty of Aberconwy in 1277 stripped away most of Llywelyn's conquests, leaving him as just the Prince of Gwynedd. This humiliation was unbearable for Llywelyn and the Welsh. In 1282, Llywelyn's brother Dafydd rebelled against English rule, and Llywelyn joined him. This time, Edward was determined to conquer Wales completely. His armies invaded from multiple directions, supported by massive supply trains and naval forces. The Welsh fought desperately, but they were hopelessly outnumbered and outmatched. On December 11, 1282, Llywelyn was killed in a skirmish near Builth Wells in mid-Wales. His head was cut off and sent to Edward, who displayed it in London. Llywelyn's brother Dafydd continued the resistance for a few more months, but he was captured in June 1283 and executed as a traitor. With their deaths, the line of Welsh princes ended. Wales would not have another native prince for over a century. Edward V's conquest of Wales was total and brutal. He confiscated the lands of Gwynedd and the other rebellious Welsh princes, bringing them under direct English royal control. He built a network of massive stone castles at Caernarfon, Conwy, Harlech, and Beaumaris, among others. These castles, some of the most impressive medieval fortifications ever constructed, were designed to overawe the Welsh and prevent future rebellions. The Statute of Rhuddlan in 1284 formally annexed Wales to England and imposed English law and administration on the conquered territories. Edward divided North and West Wales into counties, appointed English officials to govern them, and established new towns populated by English settlers. The Welsh were forbidden from owning land within these towns or serving in positions of authority. It seemed Welsh independence and identity had been crushed forever. The Welsh did not accept conquest quietly. Despite overwhelming English power, rebellions continued. The most significant early uprising came in 1294 under Madog ap Llywelyn, a distant relative of the last princes. Madog claimed the title Prince of Wales and led a widespread rebellion across Wales. The Welsh captured several English castles and besieged others. For a brief moment it seemed the conquest might be reversed. Edward III responded with his customary overwhelming force. He personally led an army into Wales in the winter of 1294, enduring terrible conditions to crush the rebellion. By 1295, Madog had been captured, and the uprising defeated. Edward's victory was complete, and it seemed to prove that Welsh independence was impossible. However, the spirit of resistance never died. The memory of Llywelyn and the other princes remained alive in Welsh poetry and legend. Life under English rule was difficult for the Welsh. English law replaced Welsh law in the conquered territories, though Welsh law continued in the Marcher lordships and was tolerated in some areas. The Welsh faced legal discrimination, being treated as second-class subjects. Economic opportunities were limited, with the best lands and positions reserved for English settlers. Heavy taxes funded Edward's wars in Scotland and France, draining Wales of wealth. Despite political subjugation, Welsh culture survived and even flourished. The Welsh language remained the everyday speech of the vast majority of the population. Welsh poets continued their craft, now focusing on preserving the memory of independence and lamenting the loss of the princes. The tradition of the Eisteddfod continued, keeping alive Welsh music, poetry, and storytelling. Monasteries and churches preserved Welsh manuscripts and learning. The 14th century brought new hardships. The Black Death reached Wales in 1349, killing perhaps a third of the population. The plague devastated towns and countryside alike, disrupting the economy and social order. Ironically, the massive population decline gave surviving Welsh people more opportunities. With labour scarce, Welsh workers could demand better wages and conditions. Some were able to buy land and improve their social position. Into this world of hardship and opportunity came Owain Glyndŵr, the last and greatest Welsh rebel. Owain was born around 1354 into a prominent Welsh family with royal ancestry. He was educated in England, served in the English army, and seemed a loyal subject of the English crown. Nothing in his early life suggested he would become a revolutionary leader. But in 1400, a dispute with an English Marcher lord changed everything. Owain's neighbour, Lord Grey of Ruthin, seized some of Owain's lands. When Owain appealed to the English king, Henry IV, his petition was dismissed. On September 16, 1400, Owain's followers proclaimed him Prince of Wales. This began a rebellion that would last 15 years and almost succeed in winning Welsh independence. The rebellion spread rapidly across Wales, tapping into deep resentment of English rule. Glyndŵr proved to be a brilliant military leader and politician. His forces used guerrilla tactics effectively, appearing suddenly to attack English strongholds and then disappearing into the mountains. He captured major English castles including Harlech and Aberystwyth. By 1404, Glyndŵr controlled most of Wales. He held parliaments, made alliances with France and Scotland, and even planned a university for Wales. For a brief moment, Welsh independence seemed achievable. Glyndŵr's greatest achievement was creating a vision of Wales as a unified, independent nation with its own institutions and culture. His parliament at Machynlleth in 1404 represented all of Wales, not just one kingdom or region. He corresponded with foreign powers as an equal, signing treaties and forming alliances. He planned for a Welsh church independent of Canterbury and a Welsh education system to produce learned clergy and administrators. However, Glyndŵr's rebellion faced overwhelming odds. England was vastly wealthier and more populous than Wales. Once Henry IV secured his throne and dealt with other threats, he could focus on Wales. English armies gradually reconquered the castles Glyndŵr had captured. French support proved insufficient. By 1410, English control was largely restored, though fighting continued in remote areas. Glyndŵr never surrendered and was never captured. He simply disappeared around 1415, with his fate remaining a mystery. Some believe he died in hiding, sheltered by loyal followers. Others imagine he escaped abroad. His family was offered pardons, but Owain himself refused to submit. He became a figure of legend, with prophecies claiming he would return when Wales needed him most, much like King Arthur. The failure of Glyndŵr's rebellion marked the end of major armed resistance to English rule. The 15th century saw gradual integration of Wales into the English state. The Tudor dynasty, which took the English throne in 1485, had Welsh ancestry through Owain Tudor of Anglesey, who had married the widow of King Henry V. The Tudors were proud of their Welsh heritage and used it to gain Welsh support. Henry Tudor landed in Wales in 1485 on his way to claim the English throne. Many Welshmen joined his army, seeing him as a Welsh prince who would restore their fortunes. After Henry defeated Richard III at Bosworth Field and became King Henry VII, he rewarded his Welsh supporters with positions at court and in government. For the first time since the conquest, ambitious Welsh people could rise to positions of power and influence. Henry VIII, the second Tudor king, completed the legal integration of Wales into England with the Acts of Union in 1536 and 1543. These acts formally incorporated Wales into the English legal and administrative system. Wales was divided into counties on the English model. Welsh representatives were granted seats in the English Parliament. English law replaced Welsh law entirely. The Acts also declared that English should be the only language used in courts and government. The Acts of Union had complex effects on Wales. On one hand, they ended legal discrimination against the Welsh. Welsh people could now hold any office, own land anywhere, and participate fully in English political and economic life. Welsh gentry could send their sons to English universities and seek careers in London. This created opportunities for upward mobility that hadn't existed before. On the other hand, the Acts of Union began a long process of cultural Anglicization. The requirement to use English in official contexts gave English prestige and made it the language of advancement. Welsh became associated with poverty and backwardness. Welsh gentry began speaking English, sending their children to English schools, and adopting English customs. Over time, Wales's upper classes became increasingly English in culture, if not in ancestry. The Protestant Reformation reached Wales in the 16th century, bringing religious upheaval along with political change. Henry VIII's break with Rome meant Welsh monasteries were dissolved, their lands seized by the crown and sold to English and Welsh gentry. Centuries of monastic life, learning and charitable work ended abruptly. Ancient libraries were destroyed or scattered. The old religious order disappeared almost overnight. Under Henry VIII and Edward VI, Wales was forced to adopt Protestant practices. Under Mary VI, Catholicism briefly returned, and Protestant reformers were persecuted. Then Elizabeth I established a moderate Protestant church that would last. These rapid changes confused and troubled many Welsh people who had little say in these momentous religious decisions. However, most Welsh people eventually accepted Protestantism, particularly after the Bible was translated into Welsh. The translation of the Bible into Welsh in 1588 by Bishop William Morgan proved to be one of the most important events in Welsh history. For the first time, ordinary Welsh people could read scripture in their own language. This gave the Welsh language new prestige and purpose. It also standardized written Welsh, creating a literary language that would be used for centuries. The Welsh Bible saved the Welsh language from possible extinction and ensured it would survive into the modern era. The 17th century brought civil war to Britain as King Charles I fought Parliament for control of the kingdom. Wales was largely royalist, supporting the king against Parliament. Many Welshmen fought and died in the king's armies. When Parliament won and executed Charles the Fair in 1649, Wales suffered under Puritan rule. The Puritans tried to suppress Welsh culture, seeing it as backward and pagan. They banned traditional celebrations, closed alehouses, and imposed strict moral codes. The restoration of Charles II in 1660 brought relief to Wales. Traditional ways of life returned, though the monarchy's power was now limited by Parliament. The Glorious Revolution of 1688, which replaced James II with William and Mary, passed relatively peacefully in Wales. By the late 17th century, Wales had settled into its place within the British state, politically integrated but culturally distinct. The 18th century brought major economic changes to Wales. Coal was discovered in vast quantities in South Wales. Iron ore deposits were developed. The Industrial Revolution, which began in England, spread rapidly to Wales. Ironworks were established in the valleys of South Wales at Merthyr Tydfil, Dowlais, and other locations. These works grew rapidly, producing iron for Britain's growing industries and military. Industrialization transformed South Wales completely. Small rural communities became crowded industrial towns almost overnight. Workers flooded in from rural Wales and from England, Ireland and beyond, seeking employment in the mines and ironworks. The population grew rapidly. Merthyr Tydfil became the largest town in Wales, a smoky, crowded centre of industry. The social and physical landscape of Wales changed more in 50 years than it had in the previous 500. Working conditions in the mines and ironworks were brutal. Men, women, and even children worked long hours in dangerous conditions for low wages. Accidents were common, killing and maiming workers regularly. Housing was overcrowded and unsanitary. Disease spread easily through the packed workers' housing. Pollution from the ironworks blackened the sky and poisoned the rivers. The human cost of industrialization was immense. However, industrialization also created new opportunities. Skilled workers could earn decent wages. Ambitious individuals could rise from poverty to respectability through hard work and ability. New ideas circulated in the industrial towns, challenging old hierarchies and assumptions. Workers began organizing to demand better conditions, forming early trade unions despite fierce opposition from employers and government. Religious revivals swept through Wales in the 18th and early 19th centuries. Methodism, a movement emphasizing personal faith, emotional preaching and moral reform, found eager followers among the Welsh. Methodist preachers travelled from village to village, holding outdoor meetings that drew huge crowds. Their message of salvation through faith, delivered with passion in the Welsh language, resonated deeply with ordinary Welsh people. The Methodist revival transformed Welsh religious life. Thousands joined Methodist societies, which eventually broke away from the established church to form independent denominations. Chapel building boomed across Wales. By the mid-19th century, the majority of Welsh people attended nonconformist chapels rather than Anglican churches. The chapel became the centre of Welsh community life, providing not just religious services but also education, music, and social activities. Nonconformity became intimately connected with Welsh identity. The chapels used the Welsh language when the established church often used English. Chapel members tended to support political reform, challenging the power of the Anglican landowning gentry. Sunday schools taught working-class children to read and write in Welsh. Chapels promoted temperance, education, and moral improvement. To be Welsh increasingly meant to be nonconformist. The early 19th century saw growing demands for political reform. Most people, including all women and most men, could not vote. Parliament was dominated by landowners, many of whom had little interest in the needs of ordinary people. The new industrial workers and the growing middle class wanted a voice in government. Across Britain, including Wales, reform movements organised to demand change. The Merthyr Rising of 1831 showed the intensity of discontent. Workers in Merthyr Tydfil rose in rebellion against unemployment, low wages, and political repression. They seized control of the town and raised a red flag, one of the first times this symbol of working-class revolt appeared. The rebellion was crushed by soldiers who opened fire on the crowd, killing more than 20 people. Several leaders were executed, but the event showed that workers would fight for their rights. The Chartist movement of the 1830s and 1840s demanded political reform, including universal male suffrage and secret ballots. Chartism found strong support in industrial Wales. The Newport Rising of 1839 saw thousands of Chartist marchers attempt to seize the town of Newport. Soldiers again fired on the crowd, killing about 20 marchers. The leaders were sentenced to death, though this was later reduced to transportation to Australia. Despite these defeats, Chartism kept the issue of political reform alive. Education expanded slowly in the 19th century. Sunday schools taught basic literacy, but formal education remained limited. The government commissioned a report on Welsh education in 1847, which produced the infamous Blue Books. These reports criticised Welsh education, culture, and morality in harsh terms, blaming the Welsh language for Wales's supposed backwardness. The reports caused outrage in Wales and became known as the treachery of the Blue Books. The controversy over the Blue Books strengthened Welsh cultural consciousness. Welsh people organised to defend their language and culture against English criticism. Eisteddfodau grew in size and importance, becoming grand national festivals celebrating Welsh literature, music, and identity. Welsh language publications increased. Cultural societies promoted Welsh history and traditions. A Welsh national awakening was underway. The late 19th century brought more political reforms. The Reform Acts of 1867 and 1884 extended voting rights to more working-class men, though women still could not vote. Welsh voters used their new power to challenge the dominance of conservative landowners. Liberal politicians who supported nonconformity, land reform, and Welsh interests won election after election. Wales became one of the most reliably liberal parts of Britain. David Lloyd George emerged as the most famous Welsh politician of this era. Born in modest circumstances and raised in a small village, Lloyd George became a lawyer and then a Liberal Member of Parliament in 1890. He was a brilliant orator who championed Welsh causes including disestablishment of the Anglican Church in Wales, land reform and better conditions for workers. His rise showed that even people from humble Welsh backgrounds could reach the highest levels of British politics. The coal industry expanded dramatically in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The South Wales coalfield became one of the most productive in the world, exporting coal globally. Hundreds of thousands of workers flooded into the coal valleys, creating a distinct industrial society. These communities developed strong bonds of solidarity forged through shared hardship, danger, and struggle. The coal valleys became the heart of the Welsh working-class movement. trade unions grew powerful in the coalfields. Miners organized to demand better wages, safer conditions, and shorter hours. Strikes became common as workers fought employers for their rights. The unions also engaged in politics, supporting Labour candidates who promised to represent working-class interests. By the early 20th century, South Wales had become a stronghold of trade unionism and socialism. As our journey through Welsh history draws to a close for tonight, we've travelled from ancient Celtic tribes through Roman occupation, from the Age of Saints through Viking raids, from Norman invasion through the Age of Great Princes, from conquest and rebellion through industrialization and political awakening. The story of the Welsh people is one of remarkable resilience, of maintaining identity and culture through centuries of challenges. But this is not the end of the story. The 20th century would bring its own trials and triumphs for Wales, but those tales must wait for another night. Rest now, and may your dreams carry you through the beautiful mountains, green valleys, and rugged coasts of Wales.